Hello students, so now we're up to chapter 3, so creating Anglo-America. So we're talking about the time frame between 1660 and 1750. So within this chapter, we're still talking about the colonies that are starting to start within North America and into the Atlantic world. And we're also going to discuss the term slavery and empire, and of course the expansion of the different types of resources that the English needed within their empire, their new world. So in 1660 in England at this point in time, Charles II was the king. So the crown at this point in time took a more active role in managing the colonies. They also included being able to grant proprietary colonies, for example, like the Carolinas, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and making sure that they can implement policies to make sure that they have imperial control over these colonies. So there's no separation between the colonies and their ruler per se in England at this point in time. In 1651, what the crown did was they instilled what was called the Navigation Acts. So the Navigation Acts were designed to make sure that the colonies continued to trade with England, and all of that benefited England. Okay, so goods, for example, like tobacco, sugar, had to be shipped through English ports. And these acts also fostered shipbuilding and trade between cities like Boston, Philadelphia, a lot of these port cities. And because of that, it sowed a lot of resentment within the colonies, because the colonies felt that they had to do everything through quote unquote British or English ports, and then make sure that everything was then for the benefit of England. So truly, there's no benefit for the colonies at this point in time. Okay. Let's talk about the colony that started in New York. So New York is also known as the New Netherland colony. It was seized from the Dutch in 1664. So originally it was in control by the Dutch colonies, and later on it was then taken over by the English, and later on named New York instead of New Netherland or New Amsterdam. So, though the Dutch had tolerated more religious and ethnic diversity, the English, of course, imposed more hierarchical society, and they consolidated their land under wealthy landlords. So, the wealthy individuals within the colonies, they were the ones that were controlling a lot of the land within New York at this point in time. On the other hand, we have the Carolinas. So the Carolinas was founded as a barrier between Spanish Florida and the southern states that belonged to Spain, and developed more of a plantation economy, which was focused on rice and also the use of slavery. So if you remember before, they used a lot of indentured servitude. Now at this point in time, they're going to rely heavily on a lot of different slaves, specifically those that are going to be coming from Africa. So Carolina quickly became one of the most rigid slave colonies and societies in British America, and they imported a lot of enslaved Africans, and they also used some Native American labor early on prior to getting their hands on African slaves to help them out on their plantations. Another colony that started in the English area was Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn, and that was in 1681, and it was basically a haven for the Quakers. So the Quakers were a religious group. They wanted freedom, they wanted pacifism, so they were very peaceful people, and they wanted fair treatment of the Native Americans. They didn't want people to be persecuted or tormented in any way. So it quickly became a prosperous colony because of its tolerant policies. It attracted a lot of different other groups from Europe at this point in time, such as the Scots-Irish, people from Germany and elsewhere. So because they were so tolerant and they allowed religious freedom, they attracted a lot of different other groups to come in addition to the English counterparts. So Pennsylvania's openness made it unique in a period where most colonies were becoming socially and religiously stratified. So as we mentioned that with regards to Massachusetts and of course the Maryland colonies and elsewhere. So definitely a different counterpart for sure. So let's talk a little bit about slavery. So slavery was central to the Anglo-American colonies. The transatlantic slave trade was very important. It connected Africa, the Americas, and of course Europe in that triangular trade system where people would be transported from Africa to the New World, and then likewise the goods that were produced in the New World would then be transported to Europe, and that vice versa in that triangle. So it was highly dependent on that and highly regulated, I guess you can say, as well. By 1700, slavery had spread beyond the Caribbean and the Chesapeake region into all of the colonies. So enslaved Africans brought skills, cultural practices, but also endured a lot of brutal conditions within the Anglo-American colonies. By the 17th century, we saw a development of race-based slavery, where laws codified African American inferiority and their permanent servitude. So unlike indentured servants who were English at this point in time and had to work for a period of time, in terms of African inferiority, they had permanent servitudes, meaning they were slaves forever, and it was kind of carried over from their parents down to children and their children and so on. In 1662, there was a law in Virginia that, for instance, made children of enslaved mothers slave for life as well. So same thing, that cyclical, constant need for slaves at this point in time. So let's talk about the rebellions, because there were rebellions that occurred specifically, like when you think about it, things that are leading up to eventually to the American Revolution, right? So this period saw resistance to imperial and elite power, specifically against England at this point in time. In 1676, we had Bacon's Rebellion, which occurred in Virginia. So poor farmers and former indentured servants, they rebelled against Governor Berkeley of the Virginia colony for failing to protect them from native attacks and favoring the elite, the wealthy that were residing there. So this accelerated the shift from indentured servitude to African slavery. And then in 1688, we had the Glorious Revolution in England, which was there to limit the power of the monarchy. It also expanded parliamentary authority, which had echoed in the colonies at this point in time. And in Massachusetts, a lot of the colonists overthrew the royal governor and asserted local control. They did not want England to play a role in their local politics. They didn't want England selecting their rulers or their governors. They wanted that separation because they were a totally different type of colony. They didn't need that oversight that England at that point in time needed to instill. So to enforce imperial control, England created what was known as the Dominion of England. And that occurred between 1686 and 1689, so it only lasted about 3 years. And it merged several colonies under a single appointed governor, who at this point in time was Sir Edmund Andros. But unfortunately, it was short-lived due to resistance by the colonies, because the colonies, once again, were like, England, why are you doing this? Why are you selecting rulers for us? Why are you controlling everything that we're doing, right? So, of course, as you focus on this, these are things that are going to be leading up to the American Revolution, to where the Anglo-American colonies are going to start fighting against England. Okay. So by 1750, the English colonies, they were more economically integrated, more socially stratified, especially in the South, because of the diverse populations, including the incoming flow of African slaves that were coming in, which also led to the increased racialization that was going on as well, and diverse populations, because now you have Africans, natives, Europeans of different backgrounds. In addition to English, you have Scots-Irish, you have Germans, you have other groups that are coming in. So of course, it's going to grow into more of a variety of different types of races and mixed populations. The colonial elites were still kind of keeping control over a lot of the colonies at this point in time, because they are of the British gentry. They're from wealth in England, so of course they're going to carry that political prowess there when they reside in the colonies as well. So even though the colonies wanted to create some sort of sense of internal identity, they still were very linked to England at this point in time, and tensions continued to brew, specifically against England by the colonies. They were kind of starting to trying to simmer with their I guess you can say their upsetness, I guess you can say, with England at this point in time. They're going to try to figure out a way that they can actually fight against them, to stand against them. Okay, so that's kind of a synopsis of what's going on in chapter 3, and then I'll talk to you guys once again when we start chapter 4.